I met a guy last week in a high-end coffee shop in Shanghai. Let's call him Jay. On the surface, he was the perfect image of modern success. He was dressed in trendy Gorpcore outdoor gear, sipping an oat milk latte that cost more than a typical lunch, and excitedly showing me his portfolio. He's a freelance content creator, a digital nomad living what he called life in the wilderness. He spent 20 minutes preaching the gospel of autonomy. He talked about escaping the corporate grind, the joy of being seen for his individual talent, and how he was investing heavily in himself, gym memberships, skincare, solo travel. To hear him tell it, he had broken the system. He was confident, energetic, and seemingly free from the anxiety that plagues his peers. But then the illusion cracked. When he opened his backpack to grab a charger, a thick, heavy book tumbled out onto the table with a thud. It wasn't a camera manual or a sketchbook. It was a dog-eared, highlighted study guide for the National Civil Service examination. The silence was deafening. The guy who had just been romanticizing the freedom of the wilderness suddenly looked exhausted. He frantically shoved the book back in, lowered his voice, and admitted the truth. He's been studying 6 hours a night for months. He's desperate to go ashore, to land a government job, the very symbol of the rigid structure he claimed to despise. That moment of cognitive dissonance was striking. Here's a young man spending lavishly on an exquisite lifestyle to project success, while secretly scrambling for the safety of an iron rice bowl before he ages out of the market. He isn't standing straight up in defiance, but he isn't lying flat in defeat either. He is stuck in a strange, exhausting middle ground. Sociologists have a name for this posture, the 45-degree youth. What exactly drives a generation to live in this state of suspended animation, torn between the seduction of freedom and the terror of instability?
That story is just perfect. It's the perfect entry point because it immediately cuts through all the easy labels we see thrown around.
Right, things like involution or lying flat.
Exactly. We hear those phrases constantly, but they imply this passive defeat or just meaningless cycling. But what the material we've been looking at reveals is something much more nuanced. It's a complex and, frankly, a deeply contradictory mental state.
Yeah, a lifestyle.
It's a whole lifestyle. And it's not about burnout or just giving up. It's an active, a very high-intensity strategy for survival. This 45-degree posture, it suggests someone is still standing, they're still fighting, but they're constantly leaning away from that primary pressure.
Okay, so let's really break that down. Our mission for this deep dive is to use the shared materials to get to the bottom of that core tension driving this posture. On one hand, you have this simultaneous desire for individual freedom, for self-expression. But on the other, there's this absolute, almost existential terror of instability. And we're going to trace this through two main lenses. First, their relationship with work and effort, this push toward the wilderness versus the pull toward the shore.
And then the second one.
And second, their relationship with spending and value. I mean, how they manage to be, at the same time, hyper-consumers and aggressively, almost performatively, frugal.
And this is where, the research approach itself becomes so important. The materials we analyze, they chose a methodology that really focuses on description over just generalizing.
Because you can't generalize this group.
You can't. The diversity within this young population is just immense. It's totally fluid. So they focus on presentation over judgment. They're not trying to judge whether this exhausting tilt is, moral or successful. Their ultimate goal, and ours, is just understanding the complexity of this group without slapping on these simplistic moralizing labels. We're trying to figure out the operating manual for a generation.
Let's start on the work front then, with what seems like the most appealing idea. This central tension in modern ambition. It's the powerful pull toward what the sources call the wilderness.
Yeah.
Seeking freedom, autonomy, individual recognition, all of that. But it's set against this almost gravitational pull toward landing ashore, or Schengen, which is all about guaranteed stability.
Yeah.
They're trying to walk this impossible line between maximal freedom and maximal security.
Well, the lure of the wilderness is intensely powerful because it's rooted in a really fundamental human desire, right? The desire to be seen.
To not be invisible.
Exactly. For this generation, you have to think, they grew up watching these massive corporations just centralize power. They completely reject the idea of being an invisible cog, just a resource to be managed in some vast corporate or state machine.
They want their own unique energy, their personality to be recognized. They want it to matter.
Yes. They want their effort to feel directly tied to their identity and, their market value.
It's a complete escape from that invisibility. And there are these new pathways that seem to offer exactly that, right? I mean, we see the rise of content creation, social media influence.
And even these highly technical, specialized service jobs, what the materials call the new blue-collar roles.
What are we talking about there?
These roles are fascinating because they show a way to kind of bypass traditional corporate bureaucracy. We're not talking about standard service work here. We're talking about roles like, say, specialized high-end drivers who are basically offering personalized logistics management.
Okay.
Or advanced nannies who operate almost like child development specialists.
Yeah.
In these fields, your skill is immediately visible. It translates directly into respect and, critically, a premium income. They can charge based on their unique, recognized expertise, not some fixed corporate salary band. Their skill is their status.
So that philosophical attraction, that idea of life as a wilderness, not a track,
Right.
It's incredibly potent.
Oh, absolutely. It's driven by this pursuit of self-sovereignty, of agency, of control over your own work, your own pace, and its meaning. When that traditional corporate track just feels exploitative and exhausting and, ultimately unrewarding in the long term,
The wilderness seems like the only logical choice.
it's deeply compelling. The idea of defining your own worth and pace, even if it's demanding. At the end of the day, you're serving yourself, not the system.
It paints such a great picture of autonomy. But this is where we hit that hard reality, the structural limitations that turn the wilderness into what the sources call the algorithmic cage of quasi-employment.
Yes. This freedom often comes at the mercy of platform capital.
Explain that.
Well, this is the fundamental disconnect between the rhetoric of individual freedom and the cold reality of capital dominance. The sources point to this dramatic shift in how wealth is accumulated. For previous generations, steady labor, accumulating a salary, that could lead to significant upward mobility.
You could climb the ladder.
You could. But now, the returns you get from asset appreciation, real estate, financial assets, they just far, far outstrip any returns you can get from individual labor or your salary, even if you're working a 996 schedule.
So even if you work yourself to the bone, that phenomenal hard work doesn't guarantee the same class leap it might have a generation ago.
Precisely. Upward mobility through sheer individual effort is structurally just much, much harder now. So the young people who are pursuing the wilderness, they're navigating a terrain that is fundamentally owned and controlled by these massive platforms and financial entities, not by individual opportunity.
And this is perfectly illustrated by that case study of the young entrepreneur, Xiao Yu, the one who thought she was escaping the corporate world by opening her own boutique flower shop.
Xiao Yu's story is such a classic example of trading one master for a far more abstract and, frankly, relentless one. She was seeking freedom, but she realized really quickly that she had just exchanged a human boss for a digital tyrant, the platform algorithm.
So to stay visible and get orders, she had to be constantly online, constantly responsive.
All the time. If she missed a chat or if her service rating lagged even a little bit, the algorithm would just throttle her traffic. Her shop would become effectively invisible.
The sources use the term self-exploitation, which is just a chilling phrase. She was working harder than she ever did in a traditional office, but with absolutely none of the security.
And that self-exploitation is enforced through this quasi-employment status that's so common in the platform economy. Think about delivery riders for Meituan or drivers for Didi. The platforms classify them as self-employed to avoid all the costs of stable contracts, social insurance, minimum wage.
While still maintaining deep operational control.
Exactly.
But how do they maintain that control if the workers are technically independent contractors who are supposed to be enjoying flexibility?
Well, the control mechanism is subtle, but it's pervasive. It's managed entirely by the algorithm. The algorithm dictates order dispatch, it dynamically adjusts pricing based on demand, and it implements real-time performance evaluation. So workers get the illusion of flexibility. Sure, they can choose their hours, but their income is entirely dependent on complying with the algorithm's opaque requirements.
And what's particularly brutal about it is what's described as this asymmetric information structure. The workers are completely in the dark about the rules of the game.
That's the psychological trap. They can't predict the platform's price logic. They have no idea why they suddenly receive fewer orders one day compared to the next. It forces them into this constant, exhausting cycle of trial and error.
Just trying to figure out what the invisible digital boss wants.
Yeah, they have to keep working longer, faster, smarter, just to decode the system. It leads to this profound stress and anxiety because they're constantly testing the limits of an opaque, non-human system.
And this adaptation comes with a severe cost. First and foremost, financial precarity and massive debt. There's no safety net at all.
The financial volatility is immense. We have that data point that 62.94% of surveyed delivery riders report carrying debt. And this isn't, small manageable debt either.
Right. What are they taking on this debt for? Is it for lifestyle spending or is it something more fundamental?
It's the cost of maintaining a basic life and fulfilling societal expectations. For nearly half of those indebted riders, I think it was 48.16%, the debt was for major necessary expenses like buying a home or a vehicle.
Wow.
And significant portions also went towards supporting their family or recovering from failed entrepreneurial ventures. They're carrying these massive societal responsibilities on their shoulders, but without the institutional safety net that their parents might have had.
And that precarity, it must translate directly into intense health risks, time risks. If your income depends on volume, you have to sacrifice your own well-being.
It's the direct consequence. Field studies show the average working day in these jobs is 9.1 hours, and over 35% of riders report working 10 or more hours daily. They're voluntarily extending their hours, but not because they're enjoying the flexibility.
No, it's because the pressure to maximize orders and just maintain a living wage is so immense that it overrides any sense of work-life balance.
Absolutely. And the physical toll mentioned in the materials is just massive.
What did it say?
The research indicates that approximately 80% of riders suffer from some degree of occupational health issues. This could be anything from chronic lower back pain from sitting all day to respiratory problems of riding in urban pollution under these intense deadlines. It's a high-pressure, high-intensity model that directly consumes the worker's physical health in exchange for a meager paycheck.
And on top of all that, these platform jobs often don't lead anywhere professionally. They feel like a career trap.
They rarely offer clear promotion pathways or any opportunities for building skills that are recognized outside of that specific platform. You don't get management training, you get optimization hacks.
Right. So it leads to this persistent cycle described as low skills, high intensity, and high turnover. You become completely dependent on the system for your income, yet you have none of the security or institutional protection you need for any kind of long-term planning. And this profound lack of security, despite all the high effort, that's the ultimate contradiction of this platform-based wilderness. And it's exactly what drives a guy like Jay, your digital nomad, to be desperately studying for that civil service exam. That structural insecurity makes the transition to our next section inevitable. After seeing the incredibly high cost of this kind of freedom in the platform wilderness, you see this growing, almost desperate demand for guaranteed security.
The shore. Shannon.
Exactly, the shore. This is the rational counter-response to all that precarity.
It's a completely rational retreat. And it's driven by the collapse of what you could call the big narrative. The traditional promise that if you just work hard, climb the corporate ladder, you'll eventually achieve financial freedom, buy a house. That's now a mathematical impossibility for huge numbers of the educated younger generation.
Let's talk about Chen, the junior developer from the materials. What was the exact math for him?
So Chen was working the intense 9-9-6 schedule, right? 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. But even with a pretty good tech salary, he did the math. The decades of intense saving it would take to afford a decent down payment in a major city, it just didn't add up.
Not against the relentless rise in housing and other asset prices.
Right. His effort, even totally maximized, was being outpaced by capital. The effort was high, but the potential payoff was distant, uncertain, and just psychologically exhausting.
So since he couldn't change the macroeconomy or the asset appreciation curve, he changed his ambition. He stopped pouring all his energy into that distant, unattainable future and started looking for what the materials call nearby fireworks.
This is such a critical psychological maneuver. If the distant future is unreachable, then your sense of agency has to be redefined in the immediate present. So Chen consciously starts to purchase a high-definition present. This means high-end experiences, quality goods that project competence and allow for self-care.
Like what?
Professional-grade coffee gear, advanced gaming consoles, imported skincare products, even customized fitness plans.
This seems so deeply paradoxical, though. Spending lavishly on these high-end items while at the same time practicing extreme frugality.
It's the ultimate balancing act. The luxury items are the fireworks, the things that create immediate, controlled quality of life and a refined personal identity. But they fund this by being aggressively frugal on daily necessities, hunting for discount groceries, using coupon apps, sharing subscriptions. They're controlling the quality of their immediate experience while minimizing all the perceived waste. The control is the key motivator.
And this anti-risk drive, this whole pursuit of Schengen is just intensified by all the macro pressure.
Oh, absolutely. It's driven by the reality of a global economic slowdown, compounded by these frequent, high-profile layoffs in major sectors like tech, which used to be seen as a safe bet.
And then you add record numbers of college graduates pouring into an already tight labor market.
Exactly. So the flight to stability to the shore, it's not a sign of laziness. It's a calculated, rational flight from severe market uncertainty.
And the competition for that stability, especially within the state sector, has become just white hot. The data on the civil service exam, the Guokao, is truly mind-boggling.
It really illustrates the desperation. Applications for the Guokao recently went over 3 million, and they're all competing for just tens of thousands of roles. For certain popular posts, especially in key central government departments, the competition ratios can be hundreds, sometimes even thousands, to 1.
Wow.
That level of frenetic competition is a direct indicator of the perceived security premium that's attached to these jobs.
So why is the Iron Rice Bowl, state employment, so universally desirable now? Especially when you compare it to the potentially higher salaries you could get in the tech sector.
Predictability. It's all about predictability. You get a predictable income, a visible, formalized career path, and crucially, a comprehensive package of essential Social Security, pension, insurance, medical benefits that often blow away what private companies offer.
And beyond the tangible benefits.
Beyond that, it offers immense social status. For young people from ordinary backgrounds or from smaller inland cities, these institutional jobs represent the highest status, the most attractive local option for achieving security and respect. It's like a multi-generational security guarantee.
And the demand for that security has actually expanded the definition of the shore. It's not just the formal civil service anymore.
Absolutely. We see intense competition for what are called Sifan 1, the porcelain rice bowl positions. These are quasi-employment roles within state structures. The sources mention that example of hundreds of applicants fighting for just one community worker role in a relatively small place like Dongming County.
And what's the appeal of those jobs?
They pay insurance, they offer steady employment, and crucially, they carry the hope of eventually transferring or being promoted into a formal state job. They are life rafts, basically, leading you toward the official shore.
This desperate search for stability is so acute that it's actually causing a major demographic shift. Reverse migration.
Yes, the phenomenon of Fengxiang Qingyan, the returning youth. They are consciously choosing to flee the coastal megacities. They are escaping what's called Chengshaibing, or city disease.
Which is?
It's that punishing combination of sky-high rents, poor air quality, pollution, the relentless long working hours, and just the constant stress of hyper-competition.
And what are they hoping to find back home?
They're favoring the improved quality of life and the comparative career stability in smaller county seats and rural areas. The salaries might be lower, sure, but the cost of living plummets, and the institutional job opportunities, even if they're limited, are relatively less competitive than the national market for a top-tier post in Shanghai or Beijing. They are actively choosing security and quality of life over the high-stakes, high-stress gamble of the first-tier cities.
So, okay, the stability of the shore is the ultimate goal. You get in, you're safe. But the materials provide a really strong counter-argument to this. They assert that landing ashore doesn't actually guarantee security anymore.
That is the essential structural observation here. Stability is not immunity. The internal workings of public institutions have evolved. They've now incorporated intense market-style competition and performance metrics, creating what feels like precarity, but within the walls of stability.
And we see this played out so vividly in the case study of the young university professors, the Qingjiao.
The Qingjiao, the young faculty, they represent the peak of educational attainment. I mean, they have the PhD, they've secured a university post. They should be the definition of having landed ashore.
But they find the waves are still crashing inside the bunker.
Exactly. They are subjected to this brutal fly or die, or Feshengizhu tenure system. They're given a really tight contract period, usually 3 to 6 years, to meet incredibly strict, constantly rising research targets.
Can we clarify what those targets are? What are they actually required to do to keep their jobs?
The pressure is existential. They have to publish a required number of articles in high-level, peer-reviewed journals, often called CSSCI-level publications.
Which is the gold standard.
It's the gold standard index for academic review. It means your research is nationally recognized and highly rigorous. On top of that, they have to secure major research funding, often national-level projects, which are fiercely competitive.
And if you fail, you're forced out of the institution completely, despite all those years of elite training.
Yes. The institutions are integrating constant performance reviews, reforms, and these market mechanisms, like short-term contracts and a measurable output, into the supposedly stable public sector. The professors themselves, they describe feeling like research assembly line workers.
Wow.
They're just focused on churning out papers and grant applications rather than deeply engaging in teaching or fundamental research. So this is the new paradox. They traded corporate burnout for institutional burnout. They still have the same constant threat of precarity that they were trying so hard to escape. Okay, so now that we've established the intense local pressure that's driving this 45-degree posture, let's zoom out a bit and connect it to a more global sense of systemic rule and breaking down. This posture, it isn't happening in a vacuum. It's a localized reaction to a global crisis of meritocracy.
And the responses to this systemic failure, they seem to diverge dramatically depending on the cultural context. We have these two very distinct emotional responses that are detailed in the source materials.
On one side, you have what we can call Western indignation. This is the mindset of institutional traditionalists, educated elites in places like London or New York. We see it in the editor, Thomas. They feel this profound, almost noble sense of betrayal.
Betrayal of what?
They grew up believing in the sanctity of merit, common sense, the objective rules that governed upward mobility. And now they feel those old, trusted rules are being deliberately eroded. So they are actively fighting to restore a system they fundamentally trusted. They're mourning the loss of a predictable world where effort actually paid off.
And that really strong sense of indignation contrasts so sharply with the pragmatism we see in the 45-degree youth.
It does. The materials suggest that the Chinese youth, having grown up in this rapidly changing system with maybe less historical trust in absolute institutional fairness, have adopted a cooler, more pragmatic approach. The reaction isn't betrayal, it's calculated adaptation.
They just accept that the system is what it is.
Exactly. They treat it like an environmental factor, like a weather condition to be navigated. Their focus is entirely on finding a secure bunker, the stable job, the reliable credential. They seek functional stability, not the moral restoration of some old rules.
But fundamentally, whether it's indignation or pragmatism, both groups are reacting to the same core global issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
The breakdown of that foundational principle that input A equals result B.
Yes, that effort reliably correlates with security and reward.
And when those rules for success feel arbitrary, or when the rewards are almost exclusively captured by capital, the social fabric just starts to fray. It creates this tension between those who want to restore the old, flawed system and those who just want to survive the current one.
And this brings us directly to the intellectual critique of the meritocracy trap itself. The analysis draws on these deep legal and sociological critiques that define meritocracy not as a fair system, but as a failed foundational myth that ironically fuels inequality and profoundly divides society. And it's a complex problem because it hurts those at the top and it oppresses those in the middle.
How does it manage to hurt the elite? I mean, they're the ones who supposedly won the game.
It creates a gilded cage. The expectation of merit subjects the children of the elite to this grueling, relentless childhood education tutors, test prep, hyper-competitive extracurriculars, all designed purely to maintain their advantage. This pressure leads to incredibly high rates of anxiety and depression among young elites.
And as adults.
As adults, they face burnout. They have to perpetually work at this unsustainable pace just to maintain their hard-won status. The material rewards are high, sure, but the psychological cost is enormous.
And how does this trap then affect the middle class, the strivers who are trying to get into that system?
It ruthlessly oppresses them by shifting the goalposts away from pure effort. They just can't afford the exorbitant costs required to access that elite education, the specialized tutors, the private counselors, the specific extracurricular profile that you need to distinguish yourself.
So without that access, they face systemic discrimination.
Yes, in the labor market, in the educational pipelines. And the result, according to the sources, is this profound social tension. The middle class resents the establishment, and the elite cling desperately to what are perceived as their corrupt prerogatives of caste just to protect their own children from falling out of the cage.
So the relentless competitive environment that we see in the 45-degree youth's pursuit of the shore, it's just a localized, intense manifestation of this global meritocracy trap.
And that intensity perfectly defines the concept of involution, or Neiwan. The anthropologist who studied this phenomenon described it with this incredibly potent phrase: acceleration without a destination.
An endless cycle of self-flagellation.
It's the psychological experience of being locked on a treadmill where the speed keeps increasing, but the view never changes. It defines that intense competition for those state jobs we talked about. You are forced to run faster, study harder, push yourself further, just to secure a position that only maintains your current status relative to your peers.
All that effort, with minimal, genuine progress.
The sheer volume of effort is maximized, with minimal, genuine progress or systemic reward. That is the definition of involution.
And this systemic pressure, it frames a major global debate right now around academic standards and educational philosophy. We see a really stark contrast between regions.
Oh, definitely. On one hand, you have the highly rigorous, deeply merit-based, standardized testing systems in major Asian powers. China's Gaokao, the National College Entrance Exam, or India's JEE. These systems are designed to produce a highly skilled workforce based almost purely on objective academic achievement and standardized metrics. They're brutally competitive, but in theory, they are pure meritocracies.
Meanwhile, the U.S., according to the materials, is moving in the complete opposite direction when it comes to university admissions.
Yeah, the trend in the U.S. involves removing standardized tests like the SAT and ACT, often because they're viewed as perpetuating historical bias. And instead, they're implementing subjective diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, policies in admissions. And this creates a fascinating, highly polarized contrast on the global stage.
And the sources raise a concern that by eliminating those objective measures, you inadvertently increase the reliance on subjective ones, like essays, recommendation letters, high-cost extracurriculars.
And the argument is that those objective criteria are significantly easier for wealthier families to optimize and to game, which could potentially compromise the very fairness the policies were trying to achieve. This shift, according to the materials, creates a potential risk to global competitiveness and academic standards.
And the sources point to a specific example to illustrate this risk.
Right. They do. They cite the example of UCLA's David Geffen School of Medicine, where the materials argue that DEI-driven admissions policies reportedly led to a significant increase in students failing basic medical competency tests.
So the interpretation in the source material is what?
The interpretation presented is that prioritizing certain non-academic factors over rigorous academic qualifications compromise the quality of medical education, which could pose a potential long-term risk to professional standards.
So we have this global acknowledgement that the old social contract is broken, but then these radically different regional responses. In one region, the response is just to intensify competition within that meritocratic frame to secure stable rewards.
Right. And in the other, there's an attempt to reform or even dismantle the meritocratic framework entirely. And the 45-degree youth are caught right at the center of these forces, desperately navigating an intensely competitive system while watching the global foundation of that very system fracture. Their struggle, it really defines the current global landscape of late-stage meritocracy.
Okay, let's shift gears completely now to the second core pillar of this 45-degree life. How their spending habits reflect this complex tension between agency and control. I mean, their financial life seems to be just as contradictory as their professional life, balancing high consumption with extreme frugality.
It is a profound paradox, and it needs careful unpacking because they are aggressive investors in specific, highly defined areas while being ruthless cost-cutters everywhere else. We can break their consumption logic down into 3 adaptive strategies: positive consumption, participatory consumption, and controlled consumption.
Let's start with positive consumption, which is driven by this concept of yoji, the pursuit of pleasing oneself.
Right. This is the aggressive investment in areas they deem worthwhile. It's explicitly focused on constructing a refined personal identity and achieving immediate self-satisfaction. And this spending isn't seen as, discretionary frivolity. It's viewed as necessary maintenance or, critically, an investment in the self that makes them more competitive or more resilient.
What are the main investment categories here?
The first one is body and beauty. This involves significant spending on fitness, health, skincare, even medical aesthetics. We see the Z generation as the main consumer force here, with growing male participation as well.
And the motivation.
It's deeply psychological, it's about confidence, it's about self-care in an unstable world, and it's about actively seeking opportunities. If the competition is fierce, they feel they have to present themselves as physically and aesthetically competitive to maximize their chances.
And the second category is this investment in hobby and expertise, which seems to go way beyond casual enjoyment.
Yeah, they spend heavily on high-end gear and professional services. Think private coaching for a sport or buying professional-grade camera equipment for a hobby. This is driven by the belief that consumption shapes professionalism.
What does that mean?
It means by investing in the best tools and the best instruction, they feel they can accelerate their self-improvement and achieve mastery faster. The expensive equipment validates the pursuit as serious and allows them to get results quicker than the traditional, slow, organic growth model.
And finally, experience over objects, which feels like a rejection of disposable culture.
Exactly. They prioritize quality, comfort, and personalized experience. Things like customized, high-quality travel or cultural immersion over budget-focused mass tourism. The materials highlighted the sincere, personalized quality of experiences like localized Zibo BBQ or the unique cultural feel of the Harbin Ice Festival.
So they're rejecting cheap, disposable trips.
In favor of deeply memorable, high-quality experiences that provide immediate, tangible value and sincerity.
Okay, let's move on to the second tab, participatory consumption. This is consumption focused on social connection and shared values.
And this is a direct response to that fraying social fabric we talked about, the isolating nature of modern competitive life. When the traditional village or neighborhood structure is gone, consumption becomes the new medium for finding community, for resonance, for shared values.
We see this in the rise of new consumption formats like Jubentia, the scripted murder games or escape rooms, live houses. They're basically buying interactions.
They're buying structured social interaction. I mean, take the fee-based study room, which is a surprisingly popular format. The analysis in the source material shows that the student isn't just paying for a chair and a quiet desk.
What are they paying for then?
They are buying a psychological atmosphere and the profound feeling of not being alone. They're paying for the collective effort, the shared motivation, the sense of belonging to a community of strivers, even if they never speak to each other. It provides this necessary psychological scaffolding against isolation.
And this reliance on shared values, it extends to how they choose which brands to support.
Which leads to the grass-growing culture, or Zongcow. This is peer-to-peer recommendation based on inherent trust, and it has effectively replaced traditional top-down advertising. Brands now have to engage consumers in genuine co-creation, sometimes using user comments as marketing slogans, and commit to transparent, sincere communication to win their loyalty.
The consumer wants to be part of the story.
Not just a passive target being marketed to, they want to co-create it.
Now, let's tackle the most jarring paradox of all: control consumption. This aggressive frugality that's being practiced by the very same consumers who are splurging on specialized gear and aesthetic procedures.
This is the Scrooge culture, the new highly active frugality. They are experts at hunting discounts, using shared video memberships, seeking out discount groceries on time-sensitive group buying platforms. They are masters of rationalizing every single expense.
But the sources are really clear that this is not traditional scarcity-driven saving.
Absolutely not. It is an active, almost philosophical rejection of purchases that they deem unworthy. They refuse to spend money on items that lack intrinsic value or that involve excessive marketing, packaging, or unnecessary middlemen. They might pay a premium for high-quality, long-lasting goods in one area, but they will refuse to spend a single unnecessary dollar on a mediocre commodity. It's an intellectual, values-driven calculation.
And the ultimate goal here is psychological. It's about regaining a sense of control in an unstable environment.
That's the key. By rationalizing every non-essential purchase and avoiding unnecessary spending, they feel like they're focusing their limited resources only on what they deem truly valuable. This translates overwhelming economic pressure into a feeling of personal agency and intellectual victory. The thrill of the intellectual game, of getting a deal, of beating the market, that provides a profound sense of having won a small battle against an unmanageable system.
So their spending is this deliberate, highly adaptive act of balancing emotional fulfillment and rational financial control.
It's a strategy that's designed to maximize the quality of life in the immediate present, while also building a small financial buffer, a kind of personalized insurance, to insulate themselves from the constant financial precarity of the platform economy.
Now we come to the final coping mechanism, this informal resistance against intense corporate culture.
Yeah, we're talking about the resistance against wolf culture, that term for hyper-intense teamwork and organizational dedication, and of course the exhausting 996 schedules. Since traditional collective protest or unionization is often inaccessible or fraught with risk, young workers have cultivated this underground culture of resistance known as moyu.
The famous term that literally means touching fish.
Yes. The phrase comes from a proverb about muddying the water to catch fish. And in the high-pressure workplace, moyu means surreptitious coping mechanisms, slacking off without being caught. It is an informal, passive-aggressive workplace protest against the feeling of having their time and energy relentlessly exploited.
It's fascinating how elaborate these passive-aggressive hacks have become.
The materials detail these specific techniques that are widely shared online, and they act as a kind of collective, informal rebellion. Examples include setting multiple daily reminders to drink water or do some minor administrative task, purely to force short, legitimate breaks away from the screen.
What else?
Other tactics involve extending the time you spend in the pantry or the bathroom, or deliberately, meticulously consuming company resources like free drinks, stationery, or paper. These are small acts of what is described as revengeful loafing.
So these are just micro-level pushes against a structure they feel they can't change on a macro level.
And they provide a necessary psychological release. These acts of resistance, combined with their highly rational and controlled consumption habits, they define the active component of this 45-degree posture. They are not lying flat, they are constantly maneuvering to carve out these small moments of self-expression and control within structures they know they cannot fully defeat. So if we synthesize this entire deep dive, the 45-degree posture is demonstrably not apathy. It is an exhausting, highly adaptive, nuanced, and intensely active strategy that has been developed to define a worthy life at a moment when the traditional social contract for success is fundamentally broken down.
It's this complex process of seeking these small, immediate pockets of freedom and self-expression.
Yes, which you see in their controlled consumption and their workplace resistance. While at the same time, they're seeking maximum structural safety and security by aggressively pursuing the most stable employment available.
By landing ashore.
Yeah. And this brings us to the final critical point that's really embedded in all these materials. All of these coping mechanisms, the hyper-rational consumption, the aggressive pursuit of state jobs, the sophisticated slacking off, they all rely on a fundamental, necessary precondition.
They rely on the continuing existence of a basic income floor and enough structural opportunities within the state apparatus to sustain this very delicate 45-degree balance. If the economic system completely fails, or if the safety of the shore becomes entirely inaccessible, then that 45-degree tilt becomes impossible to maintain.
However, with accelerating global economic shifts, the threat of AI automation to white-collar jobs, and drastic demographic changes that are increasing future societal burdens, that fundamental premise of a stable economic floor is under intensifying structural challenge. So the critical observation, therefore, is whether the 45-degree posture we see today is a sustainable new norm for navigating modern life, an adaptive strategy that can weather future crises, or if it's simply a temporary transitional state before a more profound social and individual realignment, perhaps a more significant tilt or shift in behavior becomes unavoidable. This remains the most significant implication of these generational shifts.